Welcome everyone to the third video in the Firebase Authentication in Flutter series. In the last one, I demonstrated the implementation of password-based authentication and we learned how to create new users with the help of email and password. We also implemented all that with the help of state management. That video was all about sign up. This one will be all about signing in. If you haven't seen the previous video or the first video where we worked on creating a foundation for this entire series, then you should definitely check those out before jumping onto this one. So let's get started. Let's go to the email password screen. Right now, this screen contains just the sign up form inside of the SignUpView widget. Let's replicate this SignUpView widget down here and rename it to SignInView. Users that are trying to sign in will only be required to specify email and password. So we'll remove this name variable and I will also comment out the signup function inside on action button tab. We can also just get rid of this text form field responsible for collecting the name. Great. Now, how should we display the sign in view? Well, let's go to the bottom of the sign up view and I will give a spacing of height 10. Then I will create a gesture detector. On tap for this gesture detector will be empty for now. And for child, I will create a text widget that says tap to sign in. I will copy this text and size box, then paste it below the action button in sign up view as well. We need to be able to switch between the sign up view and the sign in view. So let's utilize the magic of change notifier provider and avoid converting the email password screen into a stateful widget. I will head over to the email password auth data and create a private boolean variable named has_selected_sign_up_view, which will be true by default. Next, we will create a function called toggleAuthView, which will be responsible for simply setting this variable to its complementary value and notify the listeners after doing so. In order to access this value outside the auth data class, I will create a getter which returns the recently created private value and bears a similar name. We can now go back to the email password screen, introduce a consumer widget of type email password auth data. Builder returns with context, provider instance, and child. We will not make use of the child parameter, so let's just keep it as an underscore. Now we can access the hasSelectedSignUpView to decide which widget to return. If hasSelectedSignUpView is true, then we return the SignUpView, or else we return the SignInView. It's time for us to go over to the gesture detector we created earlier in the SignUpView and write provider.offContext. The provider will be of type email password auth data, and it's necessary to set listen to false. Then we can simply call toggleAuthView function. Similarly, I will copy and paste the same function here in the gesture detector of SignInView. Let's see how this looks. So I'm on the provider selection screen, then by tapping the auth provider, I will go to email password screen, and by default, I'm able to see the sign up view. Then over here, on tapping this text, the view switches to sign in view. Signing in the user is going to be pretty simple, since we already have all the ingredients to make it work. First, let's go to the auth service and create a sign in function. The sign-in function will be very similar to the sign-up function. It will have a return type of future of type user. It will take two arguments, namely email and password. I'll mark it as a sync. Then we'll implement a try-catch block, which will catch a Firebase exception and throw a custom exception with a message provided by the Firebase exception. Now inside the try-catch block, I will start by calling the sign-in with email and password function on the Firebase auth instance. And we'll pass the email and password that we received via the arguments. After we await for it, it returns with user credential. Next, we'll check if the user credential.user is not null. If it is not, then it means that the sign-in was successful and we can return the signed in user. Or else we can throw a custom exception saying user was null. Let's navigate to the email password auth data. Last time we created a sign-up function. So now we need to create a function that facilitates sign-in using email and password. And in the parameter, this function takes an email and password. Pretty obvious. So I'll mark it async. Then start off with a try-catch block. And I know that the only exception that can be thrown here will be of type custom exception. So I will catch it and call utils.errrSnackBar with a message provided by the exception. The first thing we'll do here is mark the UI busy. The setBusy function comes from the auth data class we made in the first video. Then I will call authService.signin, pass in the email and password and just await for it. Next, I will call the utils.removeAll and push function and pass authStateBuilder screen. I've explained why we need to do this in the previous video. Here's an excerpt from that video explaining the same. Well, we started our journey from the auth state builder in logged out state. Then we went to a provider landing screen, and on successful authentication, we remained on that screen, even though the auth state builder changed its state from logged out to logged in. Solution to this problem is pretty simple. Just write a navigator.pop after the authentication and we are good to go. But it's not the best solution as it is not generic. In this case, the authentication is just one level deep. But what if we had more levels? A single navigator.pop won't be able to get us the desired results. So instead of thinking about leaving this screen to reach auth state builder, what if we go to the auth state builder and remove all the previous routes? That seems like a perfect solution to this problem. After this, call the setFree function to change the UI state back to normal. Also, while signing in, a user might end up entering wrong credentials. In that case, the error message provided by Firebase says there is no user record corresponding to this identifier. The user may have been deleted, which is not a very user-friendly message. So instead of depending on that, we can define our own custom error message. First, we'll need to go to the auth service, then go to the exception called by the SignIn function and pass in the error code. Next, we can retrieve the code here, and if the code is equivalent to user not found, then we can show a snack bar that says no user found. Try signing up instead. Also, don't forget to set the UI state to free inside the catch block. Great. Now we need to come inside of the init function of SignInView, uncomment this code, and change this function call from signup to sign in using email and password. Of course, we don't need the name parameter for this function, but everything else can remain as it is. Let's test this out. On launching the app, we land on the provider selection screen, and I will select the only provider present here. Now we can see this sign in option within the signup view, and on clicking that, the view toggles into a sign in view. I will enter the email and password of a previously created user, and I'm logged in successfully. Then I can simply log out. Next, let's try to sign in with a user that does not exist. On doing so, Firebase throws an exception with code user not found, and we have handled that exact error using the error code to ensure that the snack bar message shown to the user is understandable. And that's about it for implementing sign in Firebase. Now let's go to the signup view and try to create an email with a malformed email address. Firebase throws an exception and here's the message. Okay, let's try creating a new account with correct email but a password of 5 digits or less. Firebase tells us the exact reason because of which the account could not be created. So this is great, but in a production app, we would not want Firebase to perform validation for us. Instead, we should do it on our own. Simply because A, Firebase can only perform limited validations during signup and sign-in, and B, the validation results take some time, thus we end up wasting users' time. So let's work on implementing client-side validations. First, I will head over to the signup view, then on the email field, and I will target the validator parameter. This function returns with a string to run validation operations on, and that string is basically the value that the user has typed in. Now, one thing you need to know about this function is that a validation on a field is considered successful if its validator function returns null, but the validation is considered as a failure if the validator function returns a string. For example, in here, just for testing, I will simply return email validation failed. Okay, but how to trigger validation? There are several ways to do that. For now, I will show you how to validate using form key. So go over to the action button and just above currentstate.save, I will write formkey.currentstate.validate. This function returns true if all the fields are valid and returns false if any of the field is invalid. So I will simply check for any invalid field and stop the flow of program using the return keyword. Now in the app, when I tap this button, the field validates to false and shows the string we returned in the validator. Cool. Let's do it professionally now. I will head over to the validators class created in the first video. All the functions inside of this class are going to be static. The first one will be validate email, which will have a return type of string ? Since validators can either return a string or null. And the argument will be of type string ? as well. Next, we will check that the provided value is not empty even after trimming. And if it is, we'll say field cannot be empty. Next, I will validate email using a regular expression, which can be done using the regex class object that Flutter has. We'll pass it the regular expression needed and call hasMatch on this object. Let's pass the value received in the argument. We'll check if the value matches with the provided regular expression, and if it doesn't, then we'll return invalid email. And finally, if the above two conditions are unsatisfied, then the flow of program will come over here and we'll return null. Let me quickly mark this function as static, as I forgot to do that in the beginning. Let's create another function called validatePassword with similar function definition, and the checks on this one will be simple. We will ensure that the password is not empty and if it is not less than 6 digits, because Firebase needs a password that is more than that. Finally, we can return null. Although you can implement your own checks to ensure that your users enter the most secure password. I will create another validator which validates simple strings and ensures that those strings are not empty. Validators like these could be used on a field like name. You can even go crazy on these to ensure that a user only enters letters and not numbers or special symbols. Now let's make use of these validators. I will go back to the SignUpView and over here, I will remove everything and just pass validators.validateEmail. We don't need to specify a parameter over here because the definition of text form fields validator and the validateEmail function is the same. Now I will do the same for name and the password field. Let's test this. So now on typing a wrong email address and tapping on the sign up button, all of the 3 fields start throwing errors. There's another interesting thing that we can do over here. Just go back to the form widget and start writing auto validate. This auto validate property is deprecated, so you should refrain from using that. Instead, use auto validate mode, which is an enum that has 3 possible values: disabled, to disable all dynamic form validations, and this is the default behavior. Next, we have on user interaction to dynamically validate the form as the user types something, or always, which keeps the validation on at all times. You can experiment and play around with them at your own time. I'm just going to leave you with a simple example. Also, I haven't implemented validation on the sign-in form as it is just a redundant task to be shown on a video. Consider that as a challenge, although it will be implemented in the code linked below. I hope you liked the video and learned something new. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. Interacting with the video really makes a difference. So don't forget to like the video and feel free to drop any suggestions or feedback that you may have for me. In the next video, we'll go over implementing Google Sign-In via Firebase in Flutter. If you're excited for that, then hit the bell icon to get a notification as soon as the video is released. Till next time.